I'm 37 years old now. If you met me today, you'd probably think I had it easy. I own my own home, drive a decent car, and I've got the kind of financial stability people my age often dream about but rarely achieve. I'm not a millionaire, but I'm comfortable. Comfortable enough that I don't worry about bills, emergencies, or unexpected expenses anymore. I've built a quiet, stable life for myself, and most people who know me would say I'm lucky. But I wasn't lucky. I built all of this out of spite, out of pain, and out of a very specific kind of abuse that I've never really told anyone in full. Abuse that wasn't physical, not in the way most people imagine, but something that cut deeper and lasted longer. My parents convinced me from the moment I could understand words that my very existence was a debt I owed them. You owe us everything, my mother would say, often while folding laundry or paying bills. Every bite of food you eat, every pair of shoes on your feet, every time you come home and have a roof over your head, that's because of us. Don't you forget it. And my father would chime in with his usual line, "You'll pay us back someday. Don't think you get all this for free." They said it so often that it became the background music of my childhood. I don't remember a birthday or holiday without some version of that sentiment woven into it. When I was little, I thought that was just normal. Didn't every parent remind their kid how much it cost to raise them? Didn't every kid go to bed with that gnawing feeling that they were some kind of unpaid invoice sitting in the family ledger? My parents weren't bad in the traditional, obvious sense. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class family. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I went to public school. I wore clean clothes. We had dinner together most nights. Nobody was drunk or high or violent. But everything came with strings. I learned very young that nothing was ever freely given. If I asked for something, new shoes, money for a field trip, even just an ice cream from the truck that rolled down our street on summer evenings, I get a long speech first. Do you know how much money your father works for every hour? Do you know how expensive you are? You think money grows on trees? Someday, you're going to have to repay all of this. I remember being maybe 7 years old, standing in the kitchen with my mom after she'd just bought me a pair of sneakers because mine had holes. I was so excited about them. They were blue with silver stripes, the coolest shoes I'd ever owned. But before she even let me put them on, she crouched down in front of me, held the shoes up, and said, "These cost $35. That's $35 you now owe us. Don't think you're entitled to this." I didn't even understand what meant at that age, but I knew it wasn't good. I knew it meant I was in trouble, somehow. I wore those sneakers with a pit in my stomach, like I was walking around with a debt collector hiding in the shadows. My father was harsher about it. When I was about 10, we had this big argument because I left the lights on in my room. He dragged me in, pointed at the bulb, and shouted, "You're wasting electricity. That's my money. Every cent I spend on you is money I worked for, and you think you get to just waste it? You'll pay me back for every goddamn light you've ever left on in this house." I believed him. I started keeping notebooks where I tried to tally up the things I thought I owed them: meals, clothes, toys, bus fare, school supplies. I was maybe 11 or 12, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor with a pencil, trying to guess how much milk cost, how much our house payment might be, how many dollars per hour of electricity my stupid lamp burned. I cried over those notebooks because the numbers were too big, and I couldn't see how I'd ever catch up. I felt like I was drowning in invisible bills. And here's the part that really fucked with me. Sometimes, they made me feel special about it. They'd tell me I was lucky they were keeping track, that not all parents were so honest, that other kids didn't realize how much they cost their parents, but I was mature enough to understand. "You should be grateful," my mom would say, patting my arm. "We're raising you to be responsible. One day you'll thank us for making you understand the value of money." But I never felt grateful. I felt trapped. Every "I love you" was shadowed by "you owe us." Every family dinner felt like sitting down with creditors. And the older I got, the more suffocating it became. By the time I was 14, I was already fantasizing about leaving home. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, thinking, if I can just get out, if I can just survive long enough to make my own money, maybe I can finally breathe. But I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me if I said my parents were abusive because they reminded me of money too much? Everyone else saw them as responsible, hardworking, practical. Teachers praised them. Neighbors liked them. My relatives shrugged and said, that's just how parents are. No one saw the way I flinched every time they pulled out their wallets. No one saw me cry myself to sleep because I thought I was a financial parasite eating my parents alive. And they made sure of that. Don't you dare tell anyone about our finances. My father warned me once when I tried to complain to a cousin. What happens in this family stays in this family. Nobody needs to know what you cost us. So I swallowed it. For years. And that's where it starts. The debt that was never mine, but that I carried anyway, like a chain around my neck. Teenage years were just childhood with sharper edges. Everything I'd learned, don't ask, don't need, don't cost, calcified into rules I followed without thinking. I kept my head down, my grades up, my mouth shut. The soundtrack at home didn't change, it just got more detailed. They moved from vague reminders to itemized lists. Ninth grade, there was a class trip to the Science Museum. $40. Our teacher handed out permission slips. Everyone was buzzing about the planetarium and the IMAX. I held onto that slip for 2 days like it was a lottery ticket. When I finally showed my mom, she read the price and laughed. Not cruelly. Exactly, but there was no warmth in it. $40 to look at rocks? She said, do you think money just appears? Your father doesn't work his hands raw, so you can watch a movie on a bigger screen. I could help with chores, I said. I can mow the lawn for the rest of the month. She tapped the paper with her fingernail. Chores pay back what you already owe. This would be extra. She put the form on the counter and left it there, like evidence. For a week it stared at me every time I walked by. The day before the trip, I told my teacher I couldn't go. Family finances, I said, because that's how my parents trained me to euphemize it. That night, my parents came home with a new flat screen, a good deal, my dad said proudly, and I watched them set it up while calculating how many science museums it cost. At 15, I got my first job bagging groceries at the local market. I was excited in a way I didn't know how to describe. Money that I made. My money. I imagined buying my own notebooks, my own shampoo, maybe even those headphones that had been sitting behind the glass at the electronics store like a taunt. My first paycheck was $117. $83 after taxes. I brought it home, still in the little paper envelope, and set it on the table like a peace offering. My dad picked it up, slid the check out, and whistled. Well, look at you, he said. Contributing. I was going to put most of it in savings, I said. For, college. He nodded. Exactly right. We'll hold on to it so it doesn't burn a hole in your pocket. He pulled out a legal pad and drew 2 columns. On the left, he wrote contributions. On the right, debts. Then he wrote $117. 83 under contributions and started listing things under debts. June groceries, your share, electricity, June, water, June, internet, June, clothes, last month, field trip, declined, still owed to family. Why is the field trip on there? I asked. You think us saying no means you didn't cost us? He said. The ask itself is part of the burden. He tore my check neatly along the perforated edge, slid it back in the envelope, and tucked it in the folder he kept in the desk with the insurance papers and warranties. We'll manage it, he said. You just keep working. So I did. I worked after school and weekends. When I wasn't at the store, I was doing homework or cleaning. I learned to wake up before everyone else to do laundry, to get it out of the way before my mom could sigh at the utility bill. I kept a second ledger, secret, penciled notes in the back of a used algebra textbook where I tracked what I thought would be fair. Half my paycheck to a future I could name, half to the present I couldn't escape. The numbers never matched their ledger. 16 brought new rules, a household agreement, typed and printed and slid across the table like a contract. My name at the top, their signatures at the bottom. From now on, my dad said, as a contributing adult in this household, you will pay rent. It's about teaching responsibility. Rent, I said. I'm still in high school. That doesn't mean you're free, my mom said. Adults contribute. We're treating you like the adult you keep saying you want to be. It was $300 a month. My job barely covered it. That agreement talked about life skills and real-world preparation and was laced with words like gratitude and maturity. It felt like they'd found a way to patent my existence. I wish I could say I fought back, but I didn't. I signed. The room was thick with expectation, and I'd learned what happened when I didn't comply. The speeches got longer, the sighs heavier, the silence colder. I handed them cash on the first of every month, my hands sweating, the bills damp at the edges. My grades dipped for the first time, and my guidance counselor called me in. "You seem tired," she said kindly. "Is everything okay at home?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just working more." "Why?" "Responsibility," I said, the word bitter on my tongue. There were moments where they wrapped the dead in bows and called it love. On my 16th birthday, my dad tossed me a set of keys. "We got you a car," he said, smiling. It was a dented Corolla with a taped deck and a temperamental engine. The kind of thing that might have felt like freedom to a kid who didn't grow up audited. "It's yours," my mom said. "We wanted to do something special." Then my dad handed me a printed sheet. Car expenses, insurance, gas, routine maintenance, a monthly gift fee of $150 to learn the value. They kept a spare key. "We'll need to inspect it weekly," my dad said. "Make sure you're not abusing our generosity." The first time it needed a repair, my dad said, "Take it out of your debt. Nothing's free." The gift had a line item, and the line item had interest. By then, my internal monologue was a calculator. I started spending more time at the public library because it was the only place that felt free. I'd sit in the aisle between personal finance and self-help and read quietly, copying down information in the margins of an old spiral notebook. I learned what a budget was. I learned what compound interest did to people who couldn't afford to be late. And I started to learn, in slow, stubborn increments, that love wasn't supposed to look like a bill. The breaking point didn't come as a blowout. It was a tiny thing that had a lot of history behind it. 17th birthday. Cake with stiff frosting, candles that sputtered, a handful of relatives in the living room. Someone asked what I wanted to do after graduation, and I said I was hoping for a state school if I could get enough scholarships. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. "Scholarships," he said. "Now that's what I'm talking about. Because your college money went to keeping the lights on all these years." It was a joke dressed like a truth. People laughed. I smiled like my face belonged to someone else. Later, after everyone left, my dad pulled out the family binder and added a new tab labeled Post 18 Terms. He slid a page to me. "We're formalizing this, so there's no confusion. Starting on your 18th birthday, as an adult child, you'll increase rent to $500, plus utilities, plus 20% of net income until the family debt is repaid." I stared at the number written under family debt. It wasn't even real math. It was years of speeches turned into a figure big enough to drown in. I felt something in me drift to the surface, like a bubble escaping mud. "I didn't ask to be born," I said. The words came out quiet, a child's heresy. My mom's face hardened. "No child does. That's not the point." "What is the point?" I asked. My hands were flat on the table. I kept them there, counting my breaths. "What's the end of this? When do I get to stop owing you for existing?" "When the ledger balances," my father said, as if that settled it. I didn't shout. I didn't slam my chair back or storm out. I went to my room, the one I'd paid for 10 times over, and I sat on the floor. I pulled out the hidden notebook from under my bed, a cheap composition book wrapped in a worn t-shirt, and I did some math. I wrote down what I made an hour. I wrote down how much I could work without failing out of school entirely. I wrote down the deposit on a room I'd seen on a bulletin board at the library. Basement unit, shared bathroom, no questions, cash only. I wrote down the phone number of my manager, who had once said, in a careful voice, "If you ever need extra shifts, I'll see what I can do." I packed a backpack with clothes and the composition book. I tucked my social security card and birth certificate, papers my mom kept meaning to put back, into a folder and slid it between 2 textbooks. I took a picture of the family binder tabs with my flip phone and sent it to myself, a habit I didn't question. I waited until 4 a.m. My favorite hour because it felt like the world was paused, like I could slip between frames and out of the film. I left the keys to the Corolla on the kitchen table, didn't want another line item, and walked out with my backpack and my notebook. The air smelled like wet asphalt and quiet. I didn't leave a note. That wasn't drama, it was strategy. Notes invite conversations. Conversations invite bargains. Bargains are just a different kind of contract. I walked to the bus stop and watched the sky hustle from navy to gray. When the bus came, I climbed on, paid in cash, and sat in the back, my heart hammering like it was trying to run faster than me. I crashed on a coworker's couch for a week. Janelle, who never asked for details, just handed me a blanket and said, "Shoes off if you're using the good throw." I used the store address to keep working, then a P.O. box when I could afford it. I rented the basement room with cash I'd stored, not at home, but in a shoebox at Janelle's, because something in me knew. I kept going to school. I arranged my schedule like Jenga, careful and tense. I told the guidance counselor I'd moved in with a family friend, and she frowned but didn't push. The first night in that basement room, I lay on a thin mattress that smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke, and I listened to the pipes clank. The window was a rectangle at ground level that captured ankles and the occasional stray cat. It wasn't much. It was mine. I waited for panic. What I felt instead was space. A calm I didn't recognize. Nobody could pull out a ledger and add me to it. If I left the light on, it was my electricity to waste or not. I turned the lamp off and on a few times like a kid pressing a magic button. Then I slept. Dreamless. Heavy. The kind of sleep I hadn't had in years. That week, my phone lit up with calls from home. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I couldn't survive the speeches yet, not without the walls closing in. Texts came too. Where are you? You can't just walk out. You owe us a conversation. You owe us. You owe. I put the phone face down and went to work. I learned how to cook eggs fast, how to mop so the floor dried in a glossy, don't die sheen, how to smile at customers even when my chest felt like someone had opened it with pliers. I registered for the SAT again because my first score had taken a hit from double shifts and exhaustion. I applied for scholarships in the quiet hour before dawn when the basement was just pipes and my breathing. Leaving didn't fix everything. It didn't even fix most things. I was still broke, still tired, still a 17-year-old trying to pass for an adult. But the ledger was mine now. I could write my own columns, and for the first time, there didn't have to be a debt under my name just because I existed. The first year out of my parents' house was survival mode. Nothing glamorous about it, just raw, scraping survival. My apartment was a basement with one flickering bulb and carpet that smelled faintly of mildew no matter how much baking soda I dumped on it. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with two other tenants who were ghosts more than roommates. Rent was $400 cash, shoved into the landlord's hand every month. No lease, no receipts. But it was freedom. I worked every shift the grocery store would give me. After school, weekends, holidays. If the doors were open, I was there. I became the kid who would volunteer for the jobs nobody else wanted, scrubbing bathrooms, hauling boxes, restocking shelves until my arms ached. I wasn't ambitious. I was desperate. Desperate not to fail. Desperate not to crawl back in here. We told you so. I ate a lot of ramen. I learned to stretch a carton of eggs across a week. I discovered you could survive on peanut butter sandwiches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you varied the bread. My clothes were thrift store finds, and whatever I hadn't outgrown yet. I patched holes with duct tape. I cut my own hair in the mirror with dull scissors. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. College wasn't some cinematic, coming-of-age chapter for me. It was hell in installments. I didn't have the luxury of the college experience. No dorms, no parties, no lazy afternoons on the quad. I went to the cheapest state school I could get into with scholarships, grants, and a part-time job stapled to a full-time job. I commuted on buses, studied between shifts, and sometimes slept in the library when going home wasn't worth the trip. My parents did try to reel me back in. They'd call, leave voicemails dripping with disappointment. You can't just ignore your responsibilities. You'll regret this when you're older. Family debt doesn't disappear because you run away. Sometimes my mom would soften it up with guilt instead of threat. Sweetheart, we're just worried about you. You don't want to break your mother's heart, do you? Just come home, and we'll figure things out together. But I knew what figure things out meant. It meant contracts and ledgers and me, once again, chained to a balance sheet I'd never chosen. I didn't respond. Silence became my armor. There were nights I questioned myself. Nights I lay awake staring at water stains on the ceiling, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I did owe them. Those nights were the hardest because their voices had moved into my head long before I left. Even in silence, they echoed. But then something shifted. I still remember the day. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt like the ground tilted. I was 19, working a double shift at the store. Exhausted, sweat sticking my shirt to my back, my hands raw from hauling boxes. A customer stopped me while I was stocking shelves. Middle-aged guy in a suit, holding a clipboard. "You're the hardest worker I've seen here," he said, almost casually. "You ever think about doing more than this?" I laughed. because more than this sounded like a fantasy. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. He nodded, then handed me a business card. We need warehouse clerks at my company. Pays better. Benefits. If you can show up on time and keep that work ethic, you'll do fine. I stared at that little rectangle of cardstock like it was a golden ticket. And for me, it was. That job paid almost double what the grocery store did. It was still grunt work, but steadier. I saved every extra dollar, sometimes literally keeping cash in an envelope taped under my bed. From warehouse clerk, I clawed my way upward. I volunteered for every extra training, every skill they would let me learn. Forklift certification, safety protocols, inventory systems. I became the guy who could do everything. When a supervisor position opened, I applied even though I thought I'd never get it. But they gave it to me because I'd made myself indispensable. That promotion meant I could finally quit the grocery store. It meant I wasn't constantly choosing between paying rent and buying books for class. It meant I could replace my duct-taped shoes with a real pair, bought new, with my money, no strings. I wish I could say the success erased the voices in my head, but it didn't. Every time I bought something, even something small, like a coffee on the way to work, I'd hear my father's voice. Do you know how much that costs? That's money wasted. That's money you should be repaying us. So I tracked every cent. I kept spreadsheets, notes, detailed budgets. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. Their obsession with debt became mine, but I used it differently. I wasn't tracking what I owed them anymore. I was tracking how far I could get away from them. By 24, I had a degree in business administration, earned at night and on weekends, while working full-time. By then, I was making enough to move into a real apartment, one with actual windows and a lease with my name on it. I bought a second-hand couch, a desk, a mattress that didn't smell like mildew. The day I signed that lease, I sat on the floor of my empty living room and cried. Not because I was sad, but because it was the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed to live under their shadow forever. The calls from my parents slowed, then stopped. For a while, I thought maybe they'd given up. Then one day, out of the blue, I got an email. Subject line, family debt update. I almost deleted it unopened. But curiosity won. Inside was a scanned PDF, typed neatly, with a total balance at the bottom. It looked exactly like one of their old ledgers, except digital. They had updated it, adjusted for inflation and interest. The number was obscene. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was a note. We're keeping track. When you're ready to be mature and responsible, we'll expect repayment. Don't shame yourself by running forever. I remember staring at that number until the digits blurred. I closed the email and sat there in silence for hours. At first I shook. Then I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a cracked one. Because it hit me, they were never going to stop. If I won the lottery tomorrow and handed them $1 million, they'd just move the goalpost. There was no winning their game. So I stopped playing. Instead, I played my own. I worked. I saved. I climbed. By my early 30s, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Management. Investments. A small side business I nurtured into something steady. I was, by every metric, successful. And one night, sitting in my apartment, I thought about that email. That ledger. That word debt. And for the first time, I thought, maybe I can actually pay it. Not their way. My way. That was the spark. The beginning of my revenge plan. I don't know when the word revenge stopped feeling adolescent and started feeling like a spreadsheet. Maybe that was always the only language that would work on me, on them. Growing up, feelings didn't carry weight. Numbers did. So when the idea arrived, pay them exactly what they say I owe and then walk, it didn't arrive with heat. It arrived with columns. I started the way I start every big thing now, quietly. I didn't tell anyone, not even Janelle, who's been a kind of older sister lighthouse since those first couch nights. I opened a new spreadsheet with a name so boring it wouldn't catch my own eye if I forgot to close it at work. Household historical inputs. Then I built it like scaffolding. 7 tabs. Housing. Utilities. Groceries. Clothing and school. Healthcare. Transportation. Post. 16. Credits. What I paid. Under each tab, I laid out columns. Year. Source. Method. Low estimate, high estimate, final number, notes. I made a separate assumptions sheet because if there's one thing my parents taught me, it's that ambiguity gets weaponized. This time, the ambiguity would be mine, tamed and written down. Sourcing was the heart of it. I didn't want to pull numbers out of the air. I wanted to build something so meticulous it would choke any argument before it could inhale. So I worked backwards from the years that mattered. Birth, late 80s, through 17, mid-2000s. I dug up anything I could prove. Some stuff I already had because I've been hoarding proofs of myself since I was a kid. I still had photos of their binder tabs from that night before I left. June, electricity, school supplies, post, 18, terms. The tabs gave me categories and their favorite language. For housing, I used publicly available county records to pull their historical property taxes, then grabbed average mortgage rates for those years and triangulated a monthly payment on a house like ours in that zip code. For utilities, I used archived rate sheets from the power and water companies. For groceries, I used USDA household food expenditure tables by family size and then set my own share at a conservative 20%, not the third my dad used to slap on me. Because I wasn't eating a third of the food, I was a kid. Clothing in school was easier than I expected. I still have a dented metal lunchbox from second grade with 5 crumpled receipts my mom had stuffed in after a back-to-school spree. I scanned them and noted the amounts. For the rest, I used school district supply lists, archived online. Those lists don't change much, and averaged out costs with inflation. Healthcare, I based on average employer plan copays for those years, plus a line item for the time I broke my wrist falling off a bike. I didn't have the exact ER bill, but I did have the date, and that was enough to estimate it within a range and then select the higher end. If I erred, I'd err generously. Transportation was just the Corolla Forward. They called it a gift. Then they invoiced me for having received it. I pulled Blue Book values for a Corolla in that condition and year, subtracted every gift fee and inspection they made me pay, added the repair I paid out of pocket, and landed at zero. Gift neutral. That felt right. I wasn't going to make their worst logic my logic. And then the credits tab, my favorite tab. It's where I put every dollar that left my hands for them. Rent at 16 and 17. I had a notebook with those payments inked in shaky teenage handwriting. $300 on the first, paid. The first paycheck they held for safekeeping. I had my W-2s and a bank statement from that year with a deposit missing that matched the net amount. Gas money they demanded when I drove my mom to appointments. The gift fee extortions. I input each with date and description, and in notes, I put what they'd said. It's about learning responsibility. We'll manage it. Adults contribute. 2 things kept me sane and, weirdly, soft while I built it: methodology and tone. Methodology meant rules. No interest. They were not a financial lender, they were parents. But I did adjust all historical numbers to present dollars using CPI, so I could pay in today's money and nobody could wave inflation like a flag. Necessities only. No Christmases, no birthday parties, no vacations, no fast food runs after a dentist appointment. The ledger was about baseline care, not moments that should have been love. Shared costs proportioned fairly. I wasn't a third of the electric bill if I wasn't a third of the usage. I set 20% for electricity, 15% for water, 0% for cable because I didn't pick the premium sports package my dad needed to fall asleep. Documentation preferred. Where I had a receipt or a number, I used it. Where I didn't, I used published averages and picked the more generous to them number inside a plausible range. If a range made me uneasy, I added a note. Conservative assumption in their favor. Tone was for me. I wrote this like a stranger auditing a stranger. Not a kid auditing his parents. No slurs, no snide. Each line, a fact with a citation. Where I had a memory, I wrote it as a footnote in italics so it wouldn't contaminate the math. E.g., electric space heater banned because too expensive, winter of 6th grade. Wore fingerless gloves to do homework. It took months. Not because the math was hard. I do harder math at work now, but because I kept stopping to breathe. Every time I typed housing, 1999, I saw the beige carpet of my childhood room and the way the lamp lit that little concave in the wall where I pressed my head when they told me I owed them for existing. Every time I typed groceries, 2003, I tasted generic cereal and the way my mother scraped the bowl and told me I was lucky she went without so I could have seconds. I didn't write back to them, but I did open their old email again with that family debt update PDF. It had a balance that was like a billboard, and it also helpfully had payment options for your convenience. They'd included routing and account numbers for a joint account at their credit union. That told me two things. First, they still believed their ledger was a living document. Second, they assumed I would, someday, fold. I copied the numbers into a secure note and closed the email. At one point, when the spreadsheet was a skeleton, I considered calling a lawyer. Not to sue my parents. There's no cause of action for spiritual tax, but to ask a simple question. If I pay them, can they come back for more? I looked up the answer myself. Yes. Money given is money gone. It doesn't buy silence. The only thing that buys silence is a boundary. So the plan clarified. Pay once, block everything. The money is just the period at the end of the sentence. There was a night I almost bailed. I was cross-checking the utilities for 1996, and I had the rate per kilowatt hour and an estimate of average household usage and my 20% share, and my brain suddenly took a shortcut to my father pointing at a light bulb and saying, "You'll pay me back for every goddamn light you've ever left on." I felt 13 again. Small, hunted, ashamed of lumen hours. I closed the laptop. I washed dishes I'd already washed. I took a walk around my block at midnight because I could, because I pay for the lights on my street. When I got back, I added a line at the bottom of the Utilities tab, total rounded up to nearest dollar. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to never do this twice. The first draft total landed in the low six figures. I stared at the number and didn't flinch. It didn't feel like drowning. It felt like a door price. I could afford it. Not easily. Nobody should pay for their own childhood like it's an elective. But yes, I could cover it without blowing up the life I'd built. I tuned the assumptions, line by line. I nudged groceries 2% higher. I added a catch-all for miscellaneous necessities capped at $20 a month over 18 years, toothbrushes, lost mittens, the glue sticks my mom used to ration. I revisited credits and almost forgot one. The time they borrowed my tax refund and invested it in a CD in their name. I found the amount in an old email thread and added it with a date and a note. Never returned. When the number stopped moving meaningfully, I printed the entire thing. 3-hole punched, tabbed, bound in a $2 binder from the office supply store, because some part of me needed to touch it. I flipped through it like I was flipping through a biography someone had written about me from a distance. I added a cover page. Childhood expenses, 0 to 17, estimated and adjusted. Prepared by, my name. Method, documented estimates, CPI adjusted to current dollars. Credits applied, documented contributions 15 to 17. Final amount due, dollar, number, 00. And beneath that, another line in smaller font. Note, payment of this amount does not imply acknowledgement that parenting is a debt contract. That line wasn't for them. They'd never see the binder. It was for me, to remind me that I wasn't validating their theology. I was ending it. The last piece was mechanical. I opened a new high-yield savings account separate from everything else, transferred the amount plus a margin so I wouldn't trip over a bank transfer cap, and scheduled nothing. I saved a plain text note in my drafts with exactly 2 words I'd already decided were the only words they'd get: debt repaid. I checked and rechecked the routing and account numbers from their PDF against the credit union's ABA number listed on their website. I set up the external transfer in my bank's interface and stopped before the final confirmation. The button said submit. My hands didn't shake. Before I closed the laptop, I took one more pass through the credits tab. There's a line there that always stops me. Rent. Age 16. $300 x 9 months. Age 17. Partial $300 x 5 months. In the notes I'd written, plain as air, signed household agreement under duress. I hovered over it and decided to leave it as is. I wasn't going to dress it up with legal words. It was a story in a number. That's all any of this was. In the morning, I called my bank, not to announce anything, just to ask about transfer limits and settlement times. The rep was chipper. Large ACH transfers typically settle in 1 to 2 business days. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the screen again. There was one more thing I had to do that had nothing to do with math. I went to the mirror and practiced saying, out loud, "I don't owe you," until my voice didn't tremble. Not because I expected a confrontation, I was going to deny them that, but because words carve grooves, and I needed a new channel. By then, the seasons had turned. I had been building this in the quiet edges of my life for almost a year. Work was steady, my side business was humming, my health was good. The old panic attacks had slowed to an occasional knock instead of a break-in. My home was filled with choices I'd made. A plant I'd kept alive, a dented kettle that sang like a little victory every morning, a framed print of an empty road because I liked the space on the horizon. I slid the binder onto the top shelf of my closet behind a stack of tax returns. It felt like putting away winter clothes. The numbers were done. The plan was simple: transfer, note, block. I'd been braced for this to feel like a betrayal. It felt, instead, like symmetry. A week later, on a gray morning that didn't seem to care about being remembered, I made coffee, sat at my desk, opened the transfer page, and hovered over the submit button. I thought about 7-year-old me in blue sneakers with silver stripes, too scared to get them dirty because dirt might cost extra. I thought about 16-year-old me holding a stack of 20s with damp edges, learning to fold money around shame. I thought about the email with family debt update and how it landed like a curse and, somehow, turned into a blueprint. I didn't press the button yet. I closed my eyes and listened to the kettle regather breath on the stove. Then I opened them and typed the note in the memo field exactly as I had written it in the draft. 2 words. And I knew, when I pressed submit, I wasn't buying love, forgiveness, or retroactive permission to exist. I was paying a troll to cross a bridge I had already built to the other side. I clicked. Money moves quietly, almost insultingly so, when you've attached decades of noise to it. No thunderclap, no cinematic drumbeat. Just a green confirmation box on my bank's website that said, transfer scheduled. That was it. 20 years of their sermons, their tally marks, their sighs about the cost of raising me, reduced to a silent ACH transfer that would settle in 1 to 2 business days. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for something inside me to crack open. Relief, rage, grief. But what I felt was calm, like holding your breath underwater, surfacing, and realizing the air is just there, waiting, the whole time. I logged out, shut my laptop, and made eggs. I ate slowly, deliberately. I didn't check my phone. I didn't check the account. I just let it exist, the way you let sunrise happen whether you watch it or not. 2 mornings later, the money was gone from my account. A completed line item, simple as rent or utilities. External transfer, dollar amount. I didn't call to confirm, didn't ask questions. I trusted the system more than I trusted my parents. But I opened my email and typed out the only words I had rehearsed for months. To my parents' joint email address. Subject, blank. Body, debt repaid. No greeting. No explanation. No signature. Just the 2 words. I hit send. Then, before my screen refreshed, I opened my contacts list and deleted their numbers. I blocked them on my phone, my email, social media. I locked every window I knew they might crawl through. It was the digital equivalent of turning off the lights and closing the curtains. Not for fear, just to signal, no one's home anymore. I expected silence. I should have known better. The next day, an email popped up in my spam folder, filtered there automatically by some blessed algorithm. Subject line, what is this? The body was frantic, full of their usual punctuation storms. Do you think this is funny? You can't just pay some arbitrary number and think we're square. That's not how family works. You don't get to walk away like this. Call us back. Now. It didn't sting. It didn't even make me angry. It read like a script I'd already memorized and discarded. Their words had lost the teeth they once had. I deleted it without finishing. A second email came hours later, softer in tone but sharper in manipulation. Sweetheart, you don't understand. That wasn't the arrangement. We sacrificed so much more than money. We gave up our best years for you. This isn't about numbers. This is about respect. About love. But that's the thing. Love doesn't come with an invoice. Respect doesn't come stapled to a spreadsheet. They'd trained me to see care as currency, and now I was returning the favor, showing them the absurdity of their own logic. Delete. Block. They tried calling from new numbers for a while. I saw the unfamiliar area codes flash across my phone like static. I didn't answer. I never will. Meanwhile, life outside their echo chamber carried on, almost startlingly normal. I went to work. I paid my rent. I walked past a bakery and bought myself a pastry on a whim, a thing that once would have filled me with guilt for wasting money. I ate it slowly on a park bench, the powdered sugar flaking onto my shirt, and I laughed out loud. A genuine laugh. Because for once, A dollar spent was just a dollar spent. No ledger. No debt. No ghostly sigh in my ear. That night, I pulled out the binder I'd made with all my calculations. I flipped through the tabs: housing, utilities, groceries, the credits I had carefully documented. Each line was both a wound and a stitch. On the last page, the total glared up at me in neat, black ink. I traced the number with my finger, then closed the binder and slid it back onto the closet shelf. It no longer felt like evidence. It felt like closure. A week later, Janelle invited me over for dinner. She'd been one of the only people who knew pieces of the story, though never the whole thing. I hadn't told her about the transfer yet. Over plates of roasted chicken and vegetables, she looked at me and tilted her head. "You look lighter," she said. "Like you put something down." I shrugged, trying to play it off. But then the words came out before I could stop them. I paid them back. Every cent. And I blocked them. Her fork paused midair. "Wait, you what?" I explained the whole plan, the months of spreadsheets, the transfer, the email, the silence. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, eyes wide. "That's the most you thing I've ever heard," she said finally. "Cold, exact, perfect. They wanted debt? You gave them debt. And now you're free." "Exactly." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They don't own you anymore." The words hit like a hammer, not because they were new, but because they were true in a way I could finally feel. They don't own me. They never did. For the first time in my life, I don't hear their voices when I spend money. I don't hear the lectures when I leave a light on. I don't imagine some invisible tally growing heavier every time I breathe. Instead, I hear quiet. A quiet I bought, ironically, with their own currency. The revenge wasn't the money. It was the silence afterward. For weeks after the transfer, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not from my parents. I had blocked every path they could use to get to me, but from inside myself. I expected guilt to creep in, shame to gnaw at me, some late-night voice whispering, "What if you were wrong? What if you really did owe them?" But the guilt never came. Instead, there was space. A strange, unfamiliar spaciousness in my chest, like a room I hadn't known existed finally being unlocked. I'd lived my entire life inside the walls of their ledger, and now that I'd paid it off, demolished it, and walked away, I realized I'd been breathing shallowly for decades. Now, deep breaths, the kind that expand your ribs, the kind that make you dizzy because you forgot air could be this full. The first test of this new quiet came, oddly enough, at the grocery store. I was standing in the produce aisle, staring at berries. Blueberries, $6 a pint. For most of my life, that kind of purchase was unthinkable. A waste. A luxury. A future itemized debt. My father's voice rose unbidden in my head. $6? For fruit? You think you're rich? But then something happened that never happened before. I laughed. Out loud. Right there in the produce section, next to a woman comparing apples. I put the blueberries in my cart. When I ate them later, each one popped like a tiny victory. Not because blueberries are special, but because I'd eaten them without shame. That was when I knew the voices were losing their power. The weeks turned into months, and life started to look different. Not just because of money. I was already financially stable before the transfer, but because of weight, or the absence of it. I stopped tracking every single cent in obsessive detail. Not because I became careless, but because I finally realized I didn't need to justify my existence to anyone. I still budgeted, still saved, still invested, but now the numbers were tools, not shackles. I started spending money on myself in ways I never had before. I took a weekend trip to the coast, rented a little Airbnb by the water, and just sat there. I read books. I walked along the beach. I left the lights on at night and listened to the waves, guilt-free. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone for that peace. My parents tried one last time to claw back in. A letter arrived at my office, handwritten, forwarded from an old address I'd stupidly left on a professional listing. The envelope was thick, stuffed with pages. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days, daring it to haunt me. When I finally did, it was exactly what I expected. Long paragraphs of rage, disappointment, manipulation. They called me ungrateful, heartless, delusional if you think a simple wire transfer erases everything. They underlined family debt 3 times. I folded the letter back into its envelope, walked outside, and dropped it in the first public trash can I saw. No ceremony, just garbage in the garbage. and I didn't think about it again. That moment taught me something important. Their words only had power if I let them, and I wasn't going to let them anymore. With distance came clarity. I started reflecting on my childhood not with the fog of guilt, but with the sharpness of hindsight. I realized how many decisions I'd made out of fear of owing. The friendships I didn't pursue because I couldn't afford to burden anyone. The hobbies I abandoned because they cost too much. The moments of joy I cut short because I imagined some invisible invoice hanging over me. And I also realized how much I had built in spite of that. The discipline, the work ethic, the ability to stand on my own. That wasn't their gift. That was my rebellion. My survival. I stopped calling it what they taught me and started calling it what I carved out for myself despite them. That shift mattered. It gave me ownership of my own story. The people around me noticed the change too. At work, colleagues told me I seemed more confident, more relaxed. I started laughing more, joining coworkers for lunch instead of sitting alone with my meal prepped leftovers. I even started dating again, something I'd avoided for years because I couldn't imagine letting someone close while carrying the weight of invisible debt. It wasn't perfect, healing never is. Sometimes the old instincts flared up. I'd reach for a light switch and pause, remembering my father's shouts. I'd buy something online and feel a flicker of shame before I clicked checkout. But instead of spiraling, I'd stop, breathe, and remind myself, paid, done, over. Every time I did that, the voice got weaker. One evening, months after the transfer, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and thought about the word freedom. I used to think freedom was running away, putting distance between myself and my parents. But distance alone wasn't freedom, it was survival. Freedom, I realized, was walking through life without calculating my worth in dollars and debts. Freedom was blueberry pints and weekend trips and lights left on just because I wanted to. Freedom was choosing silence over their noise and peace over their contracts. Freedom was never theirs to give. It was mine to claim. That night, I took out the binder one last time. I didn't flip through it. I didn't need to. I just held it in my hands, heavy and solid, like a chapter I'd finally closed. Then I walked it out to the recycling bin and dropped it in. The binder hit the pile with a dull thud, swallowed by yesterday's junk mail and empty cardboard boxes. And that was it. The ledger was gone. I'm 37 now. Comfortable. Independent. Free. If you met me today, you wouldn't see the kid with notebooks full of imaginary debts, or the teenager signing a household agreement, like a prisoner entering his sentence, or the 20-something dragging himself from shift to shift just to outrun a ghost. You'd just see a man with a steady job, a nice place, hobbies he enjoys, and a kind of quiet that feels rare in this world. But behind that quiet, there's a story. The story of parents who raised me not with love, but with ledgers, who turned food into fees, shelter into rent, birthdays into balance sheets, who told me that everything I touched had a cost, and someday, I'd better pay it all back. And in a way, they were right. I did pay it back. Every cent, calculated, tabulated, adjusted for inflation. I paid it in the exact cold, transactional way they demanded. And then I closed the account. Not just the bank account, but every account between us. No more invoices. No more guilt. No more debt. Here's the truth I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Love is not a transaction. Parenting is not a loan. Raising a child isn't something to be reimbursed. It's the choice you make when you bring someone into the world. If you can't give without keeping receipts, then what you're offering isn't love. It's a business deal. And business deals can end. That's what my revenge really was. Not the transfer, not the memo that said, debt repaid. My revenge was walking away. My revenge was refusing to keep playing a game they rigged from the start. My revenge was giving them exactly what they claimed they wanted, and nothing more. It's funny. For years, I thought the ledger was unshakable. That even if I left, I'd carry it forever, some invisible weight on my back. But the day I clicked submit and blocked every number they had, I realized something. The ledger had never been real. Not in the way they wanted it to be. It was just words. Just threats. Just manipulation dressed up as math. And when I stopped believing in it, it collapsed like paper. Do I feel anger now? Not really. Not even bitterness. What I feel is clarity. I can look back at my childhood with open eyes, no longer fogged by guilt, and see it for what it was. It wasn't my failure. It wasn't my burden. It was their choice to weaponize care, to turn love into leverage. And I can look at myself, not as the debtor, not as the burden, not as the son who owed them everything, but as a man who built his own life from the ground up, who turned survival into stability, who turned fear into fuel, a man who finally learned how to breathe. These days, when I leave the lights on, I smile, not out of spite, but out of joy, because the glow in that room isn't an expense, it's just light. When I buy a coffee, or a pastry, or blueberries in the middle of winter, I don't hear their voices anymore. I just hear mine. And my voice says, this is mine. This life, this peace, this freedom. All mine. If there's a moral here, it isn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Some stories don't end that way. Mine didn't need to. The moral is this. Sometimes the best closure is to give people exactly what they demanded, and then nothing else. To repay a debt that never existed, not because you believe in it, but because it buys you silence. And in that silence, you find yourself. So yes, my parents got their money. They got their final balance, neat and precise. But I got something far more valuable. I got freedom. And for the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone a damn thing.